Hello and welcome to an Our Fake History digital short. Today we're talking about one of the biggest misconceptions about the history of witch hunting. Roll the theme. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Major and I'm the host of Our Fake History. That's the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story it simply must be told. Here on the Digital Shorts, I like to take a little something that we've been exploring on the longer audio podcast and serve it in a more bite-sized video package. Right now on the main podcast, we've been examining the Salem witch trials. The 1692 panic that broke out in Massachusetts Bay Colony has become the best remembered witch hunt in history. However, there's a common myth about witch hunting's place in our history that I think needs to be busted. This is the idea that witch hunting was especially prevalent in the so-called Dark Ages, or early medieval period. The thinking goes that the further back you go in time, the more superstitious and primitive our ancestors become. If witch hunting is the height of superstitious thinking, it only follows that it was more common in earlier times. This is completely untrue. First, this is based on the flawed premise that Western civilization has somehow been evolving steadily from darkness to light from the fall of Rome up to now. That is simply not how things unfolded. In the past on Our Fake History, I've explored whether or not the terms Dark Ages and Renaissance are misleading when examining European history. Well, one huge piece of evidence that can be used to blow up the traditional conception of a dark Middle Ages followed by an enlightened Renaissance are the statistics concerning witch hunts. The phenomenon called the witch-craze by some historians is a decidedly early modern event. Interestingly, in the early medieval period in Western Europe, a time that's been maligned as a so-called Dark Age, witch hunting was not especially common. I'm sorry, Monty Python steered you wrong on this one. Witch hunts were exceedingly rare in that period, and European Christians were decidedly less concerned with the corrupting influence of dark magic on their society. The historian John Demos has pointed out that the attitude of the mainstream church in the early medieval period towards magic was, quote, ambivalence. Tolerance, not to say complicity, was frequently the norm. Individual priests might even double as conjurers, dispensing what were essentially magical remedies alongside their regular parish ministrations. End quote. Somewhat counterintuitively, the era when witch hunting really exploded is the period that commonly gets called the Renaissance. Yes, that period in European history that's been celebrated as a rebirth of learning. That is when witch hunting reached its bloody climax. European witch hunting really picked up steam in the 1500s, reached a zenith in the 1600s, and didn't fully peter out until the mid-1700s. This is a period that is sometimes referred to as the birth of modernity. That is when the big witch hunts happened, which puts the Salem incident right near the peak of the witch craze. So why did things take off so violently in those centuries? Well, part of it had to do with an evolving perception of Satan as an adversary to God who is actively inspiring evil in the world. A number of historians, including the influential Salem researcher Marion Starkey, have argued that witch hunting, and by extension out-of-control witch panics, seem to loosely correlate with periods of societal anxiety brought on by non-witch related factors. Periods of famine, climate change, natural disasters, political strife, and warfare often set the stage for the most deadly rounds of witch hunting. It's been argued that the 16th and 17th centuries were especially volatile because of a confluence of destabilizing factors. First, there was the massive religious upheaval of the Protestant Reformation. The Western European Church was split, and in the ensuing theological tumult, dozens of new interpretations of Christianity emerged. There was a pervasive belief among Protestants that for centuries, religious worship had been happening in the wrong way, potentially damning all those who had foolishly partaken. The Roman Catholic Church itself was perceived as a demonic institution, and the Pope a minister of Satan. Conversely, Roman Catholics believed that their former co-religionists had been corrupted by a dangerous new heresy. People were more suspicious of their neighbors than ever, and openly suspected many of them of being in league with the devil. These religious conflicts often turned violent and in many cases developed into full-scale religious wars. War also brings its own kind of tumult. Even if you're a non-combatant, war can mean famine, deprivation, and all the indignities suffered by a population when an invading army moves through their territory. It's perhaps no surprise that Germany saw some of its most tenacious witch hunts break out during the height of the chaotic and destructive 30 Years' War. This was also a period of climate change. The 16th and 17th centuries happened to fall in the coldest parts of a 4-century-long period of cooling, sometimes called the Little Ice Age. This meant that in these centuries, crop failures due to a cooling climate were considerably more common. Winters were longer and harder. Summers could be dry. All the disruptions that come with an unpredictable climate or more extreme weather characterized these centuries. Scholars of the Salem witchcraft crisis have pointed out that the Little Ice Age peaked, or rather bottomed out, in the 1690s, right as the Salem witch trials were getting underway. In these centuries, there was a thick soup of anxiety that people were wading through. Historian John Demos lists the ingredients in this soup as, quote, a persistent inflationary spiral and periodic depressions in trade, the start of a wrenching transition to commercial agriculture with much resultant dislocation and dispossession for large elements of the peasantry, recurrent political turmoil including local revolts, religious and civil wars, harsh climatological change, and epidemics of plague with accompanying famine, end quote. Now, of course, over 2 centuries, the severity of any one of these stressors is going to ebb and flow. Sometimes, and in some places, things can stabilize and even flourish. Then, at other times and in other places, all the negative currents can converge in a torrent. It's in those times and places that you often find witchcraft panics. It's been argued, and I have to agree, that New England in the late 17th century was exactly one of those times and places. If you want to hear more, then please subscribe to the audio version of the Our Fake History podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more cool stories from the past.